Okay, welcome back. This is Chapter 14, Server Hardware Features, page 245. So basically, servers are designed for, performance, although maybe not like a gaming rig, but robustness, yeah, integrity and manageability. In other words, you don't want things to fail. Okay, so in particular, when it comes to performance, they're really talking about network performance a lot, maybe storage. But, for example, you can get a 128 core, but it's running at, 1.8 gigahertz. So, you're trading off, the robustness of the CPU for its speed. Okay, just saying. So, would a server make a good gaming rig? Nah. No. The cores are just not designed for that. I mean, clearly a server is probably not going to have, a super duper, NVIDIA, 3000 series or 4000 series graphics card in it. Although, perhaps if you're doing mining, maybe you would, but not for playing games. So basically, there's two categories of hardware. The enterprise versions, for like line of business kind of software, it's specifically designed for doing that kind of stuff. And then a cluster style. And a cluster style is, where you'd have hardware sharing and failover. For example, if I buy a Dell server that fit into a 19-inch rack, without me asking for it, it's going to come with 2 redundant power supplies. Yeah. And a handful of redundant fans. Okay? Probably like 3 or 4 redundant fans. Yeah. Okay. That's just kind of normal, because all the things with moving parts, like the power supply and traditional spinning hard drives, those are the things that fail. Okay. So continuing, there's a bullet list on page 246 talking about comparing servers to normal workstation machines. So in the CPU performance, multi-core is king. In other words, I will sacrifice CPU speed for getting more cores. The more cores, the better, kind of a thing. And for input-output I/O stuff, typically we don't need like a very sophisticated, USB controller. But I want the honest-to-God best, SATA controller or NVMe controller, or stuff to get to my hard drive storage. And yeah, I want very, very good networking, maybe even 2 network cards. Okay, all right. So I/O stuff, input-output stuff, that's probably where you can see the difference between a workstation and a server. Expandability, typically when you buy, go to Best Buy and buy a computer and take it home, there's not an empty CPU slot on the motherboard waiting for you to fill it in, right? Well, that's not the case with a lot of servers. You could get up to like 4 CPUs on a motherboard, but you only have 1 or 2 populated now. And then as your needs increase, instead of buying another computer, you just buy a CPU and put it in there. We had a scenario where we bought, by the way, we almost always bought 2 of each. That way you could always get things to match, for failover. So we bought 2 servers, and later when we decommissioned them, we pulled all the CPUs out of this one and put it in this one. So now I had 4. Pulled all the memory out of this thing. So instead of having whatever it was, 16 gig, now it has 32 gigs. So we actually, when we decommissioned the machine, we actually pulled all the guts out of one, put it in the other, and it became like our development server or something. Okay, so it's practically impossible for a commercial, home-based system to have an extra CPU slot. That just doesn't happen. Rack mountable, obviously, servers are most likely. I mean, you can still get a thing that, on the Dell website, you can still get a server that kind of sort of looks like a PC. Front and rear access, you want to be able to get to things, right? Particularly if it's in a rack, you're going to have some buttons and indicators on the front, and then you're going to have all the, the cords and stuff coming out the back. That's typical, right? Just like a normal PC, you got the on-off switch and hard drive activity light, maybe a reset button on the front, and then all the stuff coming out of the back. Okay, that part's the same. High availability. I mentioned redundancy. There's probably going to be a redundant power supply and a redundant fan or 2. Yep. And then remote management. These things are going to have built into them. There's a There's a couple ways you can do that, but you know, Intel has produced this remote management feature, chip feature, that allows some very sophisticated software to go in and do some cool stuff on their machines without physically having to touch them. Okay, so consumer grade parts versus enterprise parts. Well, at home, when you buy a stick of RAM, it's always called non-ECC, error correcting, error checking and correcting, ECC. And that's, so if there was, I don't know, a stray cosmic ray hit the RAM at just the right time, it could flip a bit and your machine would, you know, get the wrong data. I mean, it's not very likely, but it could happen. And, you know, just things fail. So in servers, they have ECC memory, error correcting memory. So that if something goes wrong, the machine goes, whoa, hang on a second, let me try that again. Okay, and most of the time the problems are transient, so they don't really cause a problem. And then hard drives, you know, thinking about a traditional spinner hard drive, right? Western Digital has these colors. You know, they have a red drive and a blue drive and a green drive. It's actually kind of funny because the idea is that, you know, a black drive is for the highest performance, like in a gaming rig kind of a scenario. Green is the ones that are, you know, kind of wimpy but power saving, you know. And then blue drive is kind of ordinary, normal thing. Red drive is for putting into a network attached storage. These guys are designed to run non-stop. In other words, a red drive is designed, you power it on and it's going to run for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, non-stop and never ever be turned off. So there's slightly different kind of configuration. Anyway, there's lots of different colors, like the gold drives for enterprise. So what's the difference between a gold drive and a blue drive? Well, gold ones have slightly better performance. Well, that's not true. Slightly better longevity. For example, the warranty on these guys is much greater than the others. And Western Digital, for example, has figured out that, you know, you're going to be buying these things probably in bulk, and that maybe 2 or 3 years later you want to buy an exact version of that to replace a failed drive. Well, on a blue drive, you know, once that model run is done and they switched over, you know, let's say it was an 8 terabyte drive, and then, you know, a year later they come up with a 12 terabyte drive. The year after that, it's a 14 terabyte drive. So if you want to go back in time and buy something that's 3 years old, they're going to say, oh man, we sold out of those like 3 years ago. We don't make, you know, 12 terabyte drives anymore. The gold ones, yeah, they basically are going to tell you that you're going to pay a little bit more. There's a little bit more warranty, and we're going to have these things in stock for a while. Okay, cool. All right. So remote management features is another cool thing. There's a thing that the servers have that normal machines don't, that allow you to have perhaps even a separate network. Yeah, it is possible to have a separate network that just all it does is talk to your machines. It's called out of band. Out of band basically means my management channel doesn't compete against the output of, you know, the normal operations of the server. Let's say this thing was a web server, and, you know, your network card is really being used for, you know, serving web pages, right? So you have another network card that's just for management. That way they don't have to compete. Cool? All right. So operating system differences on page 248. So do I really need a graphical user interface on a server? I mean, typically you don't ever really log into the server. I mean, it's pretty doggone rare that you would, you know, go into the server room, sit down in a chair, you know, grab a mouse and a keyboard and a monitor and hook it up to a server and do something. I mean, that's pretty doggone rare. So perhaps you don't need a front-end GUI. Remember when we installed Windows Server, we had an opportunity to say, I want the desktop, you know, experience, which meant you do get a graphical user interface, a GUI, or you could say no, which means you just got the command line. All the stuff is there, but you know, fancy Windows thing, you know, no tiling and all the rest of that stuff. Okay, so why on earth would I want to install something that did not have a graphical user interface? There's got to be a reason, right? A very good reason, like reasons that might show up on test questions. Okay, so yeah, it's about the attack surface. If you don't have, for example, I don't know. I don't have an audio player, okay, or a video player on my server. That's okay, right? I'm never going to use that on my server. But if I had that feature and someone found a vulnerability in it, well, then they could attack all these machines that have, this audio player. But I don't have the audio player, so therefore I'm safe. So reducing the attack surface basically means that I'm having fewer things installed on my machine that I really don't need that other people could exploit. Okay? Cool. So, server core. They used to, some versions of Windows just gets installed with this bare bones thing with no user interface whatsoever other than a command prompt. And let me tell you, I tried this once. A couple of years ago when server core first came out, I said, I'm going to try this. It was probably Windows 2012, I'm guessing. I don't really remember. So I fired it up and I, and did the install, and it booted the first time. I logged in as the administrator and I got this prompt and I went, so time for me to do all the things that we did in that video on setting up the machine. I need to rename the computer. And I went, I've never done that from the command line. I have no idea how to change the machine name from the command line. So I had to stop, go look it up, learn how to do this in PowerShell. And then, okay, wait, I need to, change the time zone. Well, I've never done that without a GUI either. So I had to stop, Google that, find out what the PowerShell command was to change the time zone. And wait, it's time for me to join the domain. Well, I've never done that from the command line. And it just went on and on. It probably took me 30 minutes to get this thing all configured because I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff on the command line. By the way, PowerShell, which is the kind of sort of the replacement from the command prompt, very, very powerful stuff. If you ever decide to be an honest-to-God Windows system administrator, okay, then, man, you need to go get the PowerShell book and learn that. I mean, I wish we taught PowerShell at the university. Maybe we will one day. Okay, so server core, yeah, reduces the attack surface, but oh, man, be prepared to be humbled by what you do not know how to do. Okay, so scheduled reboots. Typically, you can do an update on your machine and it comes up and says, hey man, you need to reboot now. And you go, oh, okay, sure, whatever, dude. Well, you really can't do that in the server world, right? I mean, you're going to have to pick the times you're going to do things like, maybe at 2 o'clock in the morning. And you probably, if you had like 5 servers, you don't want them all going down at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe have what's called a rolling reboot. This guy at 2 o'clock, this guy at 2:10, this guy at 2:20, this guy at 2:30, 2:40, 2:50. Okay, that kind of a thing. A rolling schedule. Okay, they talk about the top 5 server mistakes. I think this is kind of cool. One is, don't decide, hey, I'll just promote this workstation. I'll just wave a magic wand over it and install some software, and okay, that's going to be my server. That's really a bad idea. The hardware is just not ready for it. So don't just pick a machine and say, okay, that's going to be our server. The desktop hardware is just not really suited for that. For example, a traditional drive really isn't designed to run 24/7. Don't ever share a server with a desktop user. In other words, don't have somebody log into the machine, which is also the server. Don't do that. That's just dumb. One thing is that they talk about it in there, but yeah, and the promised you they'll never ever accidentally turn this machine off. Right. Yeah, sure. Don't leave a server on a desk someplace. These things really, really need to be separated. You don't ever want to have physical access to a server. Okay. Well, if you take any of the security courses that tell you, if you walk into a room and you can physically touch the machine, there's absolutely nothing you can do from a security point of view to keep me from taking over your computer. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.